going on, everybody? Kevin here from Moltenworks Glass Studio in Woodinville, Washington. Today, our video is going to feature using textured glass. There's some textured glass that has really deep grooves, and it's kind of a variety, more waterfall-like look like this piece. We got a little bit straighter lines. Today, we're going to explore using, and then we also have, of course, very straight up and down lines with grooves in them. Now, my members have asked me when they first started using textured glass, what the heck do I do with it? How do I use it? And my answer is I really like to use the pieces together to create really cool bubbles that get trapped inside the glass. So today we're going to do some sample pieces and show you just how the different textured glass reacts, how we're going to put it together so that we can get cool bubbling. Especially the straight groove stuff is really awesome because you get very uniform bubbling throughout the piece that you might be making today. So I hope you guys enjoy, and let's dive on in. All right, so today I've got this variety. Here's my kind of straight edge glass. This is Bullseye. Of course, both System 90 and 96 have the same different kinds of textures. I tend to use 96, but I happen to only have the straight one in Bullseye, so it'll still work as long as I'm only using that color together. So to start off with, these are my other textures. I'm going to move these to the side. And then as we're using and cutting this today, I have a kiln shelf here. So I get my kiln shelves cut down to this size so that they're easy to work samples on and use. I've got some Bullseye paper here that I'm just setting right on top of that so the glass doesn't stick. Then I have my space to add my samples that I'm going to run today for you and show you just some different ways that we can use the texture on our glass. All right, so I got my tools, scoring tool and runner. We are going to start off with this crazy glass. I used this a while back. This is obviously a scrap piece that I'm working with. I made some giant vases and other things with it that created these really cool bubbles. So whenever I'm cutting textured glass, I'm going to flip it so that the smoother of the two sides are face up, because obviously I will not be able to cut it any other way. And actually we're going to use this other textured piece here. So I'm again just going to cut it up, and to use the texture, once I cut it up here, not the easiest to cut. Just gonna break that apart. Now there's two ways. I like to take the textured side and put it between the layers, so texture should be face in. This is gonna trap those bubbles in a variety of ways. Now, obviously the bigger piece you use, the more bubbles that can get trapped in the center, creating that cool effect. So for this, I'm gonna try a smaller one where I cut this in half even. And now I've got my textured glass. So you could lay them right on top this way. I like to lay it at odds and ends, different ways so that the bubbles can trap themselves in. I'm not too worried for these samples about it hanging over the edge, because this is just gonna show you again, how to use those bubbles or how they get formed once you cut your glass. And then same thing here, just cut this one in half. And then for this one, we're just gonna put it same direction. And again, just add that onto our kiln shelf there. When I'm firing these, I'm gonna full fuse these together. That's gonna give you the best kind of bubble effects. The next one we'll use here, this is a little more straight, slight wave to the texture, but again, flip it to that smoother side here. And now I can just cut off a piece of this as well. Now for these more straight edges, straight textured pieces, we're definitely going to want to do the direction of the texture opposing so that it will really lock in some cool bubbles in there. So if I just
cut off some squares here. Figure out where my score is. Then I can do it the same width. So now as I lay it, again, texture is going to be on the inside of this. So I'm laying these opposing as opposed to across from each other, because if they're straight, it's not going to lock in the bubbles the way I want. So there we go. All right, and then finally, we'll use this really straight bullseye one. Has a little irid in it, which is pretty cool. And again, just going across so I can get some cool samples for you guys. Something else I've done with this is actually take powdered frit and fill in between the grooves. Kind of creates a cool effect. And I'll just show you, I did some brain coral out of this crazy design. So again, a light amount of powder, not too heavy. You can see the darker parts are where the grooves really were, a few little bits on top. I used a sifter to sift over the top of that. And again, it's the powder level of frit into that project. Okay, now I'm just gonna cut some squares for this one. And again, compatibility wise, if you're not familiar, bullseye and oceanside don't mix. They expand and contract at different rates. So it's okay that they're in the same kiln, even though bullseye might need a slightly different temperature. It should be okay for this experiment because we're just running it at full fuse. So again, I've got my vertical striations in there, and I'm gonna just lay them opposing, kind of creating that checkered pattern. What's really cool is, so in between where you see the little squares on this, you are going to get the bubbles patterned in kind of the same way. So here is, again, kiln shelf, the different samples that I'm running to see how this kind of looks. I have found that the best way to use the textured glass is to get those bubbling effects. I think my members would agree here at the shop, as they have been creating and figuring out what to do with this. So we are gonna go ahead, take this to the kiln, and don't worry, the schedule will be in the description for you guys. If you have any questions, of course, let me know. I'm happy to answer all those. But for now, we're gonna have to wait a day, and we'll be pulling this out of the kiln and show you the results. All right, so I have a clamshell kiln here that I'm using. It's 24 by 24 inside. I've already got my pieces on a kiln shelf, so I can just set it directly on this other one in here. And there we go. All right, now we're ready to close it and full fuse it. All right, so for this setting, we're gonna full fuse. Now, full fuse may vary a little bit in your kiln, depending on how hot or cool it runs. Not all kilns are the same or run at exactly 1450, 1460, right in that range is where we're going. So I'm gonna go to my program one. I've got 5 segments in that. Our first segment is 250 degrees an hour to 1000 and hold there for 0. Then we're gonna ramp up full blast to, in this kiln, it's 1470. Again, your kiln may be different. I found that depending on what kiln I'm using and how long the elements have been in there determines the temperature. So make sure you know your full fuse temperature so that you can get it right. We're gonna hold there for 12 minutes, and then we're gonna go back down to our annealing temperature at 950. Gonna hold there for 60 minutes, and then we'll continue to ramp down 200 degrees an hour to 800, hold 0, and finally 300 degrees an hour down to 100 degrees, and that'll take us back down. And now we're ready to start our kiln. All right, everybody, time for the big reveal of the bubble projects and using textured glass that we were experimenting with. Now, in this front corner here, we have the frit that we dusted on into the grooves of that textured glass. So you can see how that comes out really nice, kind of a cool patterning. And then our more striped lines, you can see how that comes out as well.
And then on the other side, we have our bubble effects. So the random bubbles, you can see that they have lots of bigger, smaller, kind of varied bubbling. Same with this other piece here. Now you can see it didn't really matter too much how we laid them across each other, since it's a kind of a random pattern in it. And then for our other ones, so you can actually see here, so this bullseye didn't actually fire into making bubbles or full fuse. It's still probably more contour fuse there. And that may have been due actually to the iridescent that was on it, because when you put two iridescent sides together, it doesn't fuse very well, since it's metal on metal, because that's what the irid is, much like dichroic glass. But it still created kind of a cool grid-like pattern. So if you had iridescent on that side, you could actually create a cool texture. This other one, however, came out really awesome. You can see all of those little even bubbles in that design. It's pretty cool how it turns out. So on a bigger scale, you could then shape this up. Maybe would make a nice candle holder or something along those lines. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this video on using our textured glass. Just a quick recap. We had some of this iridescent straight line textured glass from Bullseye. When we fired it with the Spectrum at our usual temperature, it didn't quite melt as far. And as I talked about, that might be actually due to the iridescent and them being butted up against each other. So metal on metal, it doesn't tend to stick. You'll find the same issue with dichro if you're trying to put dichro directly on top of another piece of dichro with the actual metals film touching each other. So this is our before, and then when layered after result. Then we had our slightly straight, but a little bit of wave glass. That created a really nice line of bubbles that you can see on a bigger scale and make a really cool candle holder, because you really get the light through, and the bubbles would add kind of a cool effect. And then our last piece, I was using some leftovers from a big circle I cut, and that is going to be the deep textured glass. And you can see that result. It creates very varying bubbles. So if you're doing an ocean scene, you might want to incorporate this into your design underneath, adding your fish on top, so then you get natural bubbles in your project. And then with that texture, we also did frit powdered glass in it as well. And again, using a sifter to sift it out pretty evenly, not going too heavy so that it really just falls in the grooves and not on top. So that creates a really cool effect. As I showed you, I also did a little brain coral with that particular type of glass and using the frit method. And then back to the other ones, that more straight line powdered on top, you can see kind of a finer line. Again, this would also be a really cool way to do a candle holder, because you'd have some cool unique lines, and something you might consider when you're working with textured glass. This is just a few ways of how I use it. Of course, there are, I'm sure, many other ways to do it as well, but I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you'll tune into the next one.